I knew something was up with the startup. I knew there were some things going on that had me thinking that maybe this wasn't a long-term play. And also my personal life became very public. And what I had hidden in for years and had not talked about and had glossed over and explained away had become public. And I was giving all of this advice and I felt like an absolute fraud because I had this incredibly successful career and I'd gone to a startup, and lo and behold, by October of 2023, that startup was no longer. And I remember week after week recording this podcast and thinking how disingenuous I was for providing tactical advice and examples and illustrations for how to build this amazing career, when in fact I was lost and I didn't know what my next right step was. Happy holidays! It's our birthday at the Opt-In Podcast. I am Melissa Franks, your host, and we are 3 years old as of today. Well, yesterday. But who's really counting? In December of 2022, I launched this podcast. It was a labor of love. I was incredibly excited to be able to start speaking to all of you and build a community, and what a ride we have been on. So today's episode of the podcast is a little bit of a trip down memory lane, and interspersed in that will be some, I don't know, maybe nuggets you haven't heard before, or lessons learned, or just if you're new here, you'll get the full story of how the podcast came to be. So all of this starts with a dream that I had probably in COVID, if not earlier. You see, I was inside of a corporate structure for my entire career. And none of this is new to you, probably. I worked in financial services, and I worked in technology in financial services, and I worked for a big old German company, which meant that things moved slowly, things were highly political, and I lacked mentorship. There wasn't anybody that looked like me, was my age, was my gender, was married, had kids. Like, it just didn't exist at anything other than middle management. And when I got to middle management, I knew that that wasn't where my journey was ending. It was a really interesting time in that business because I was able to look at aging workforce. Most of them were boomers in the last third of their career, and many of them had been doing the exact same job for 20 years or more. In fact, many of them had never worked anywhere else. This is what they knew, and this is what they did, and this is how they rolled. And I started to ask myself, is this what's next? Like, is this how this is supposed to go? You build your career to a certain level, you get an income that is, and then you just coast. And I'm not a coaster. I can't just tread water and enjoy the fruits of my labor. It's just not in my DNA. And so I knew pretty immediately that while that was their reality, I wanted something more. I just didn't know what that more was. And what that led me through was a multiple decade journey to the C-suite. It gave me a really solid run in the C-suite. And then it got me to 2022 when this podcast was formed. But what I don't talk about a lot is that as I was finding my way in the corporate structure, was lonely. I didn't have any peers. I didn't have anybody that I could trust. I didn't have anybody that could mentor me and I could say, hey, how should I navigate this situation or this personality, or should I take this promotion or should I wait? I mean, one huge example that I can give y'all about how I just completely lacked a blueprint was when I got pregnant with my first child. There was a lot of turmoil in the organizational structure. Spoiler alert, it was always that way. I just didn't know it at the time. And I was one of a few being considered for a management role. And there weren't a lot of management roles. This was a contracting company, so it was really rare that these opportunities became available. And I knew that if I told anybody that I was pregnant, I would be passed over for the job. Now, all of you are probably thinking, like, was this 1985? Friends, it was not. It was 2008 going into 2009. And I was so excited. I had just gotten married. We just bought a house. This is our first baby. I was so excited. And I made a conscious choice to not tell anybody. Well, after that 3-month period where you don't tell people, I wore baggier clothes. I hid morning sickness, which was real tricky because my breakfast was typically some sort of combination of tater tots and donuts, and I'm a really healthy eater. I abstained from alcohol. I went to holiday parties and gave my then husband my glasses of wine to drink so that nobody knew that I was pregnant. I hid that thing because I knew that if anybody knew that I was going to get the promotion, they wouldn't give it to me if I was pregnant. I just knew it. I knew the culture of the company and I knew the whole thing. Well, I got passed over anyway. And so I didn't tell anybody that I worked with until I was well into my 6th month of pregnancy that a baby was coming. Now, that is really problematic because that is not enough runway for them to plan for you to be out for 3 months. That is not you being an honest, upfront employee. Like, there are so many things wrong with that choice that I made. I'm shocked I didn't get blackballed through it. Shocked, frankly. But I made a horrible professional choice, not to mention the fact that I was leading like a double life and it was really stressful on me when I needed to have less stress. And I share that to say that the reason I did that was because I thought that I knew how the corporate landscape functioned. I thought I knew how politics work. I thought I knew how promotions would work, and I got it wrong. And listen, long story short, it was the best thing that I didn't get that promotion because it led to other opportunities down the line. And also, misogyny was at play. It was a very older gentleman that was put into the role that wasn't qualified and didn't last in that role any longer than 3 months because he wasn't qualified, but he had more time in chair and he had more tenure with the business. And so the voice line that I got was he was just more experienced and ready for the role. The reality was he wasn't. The reality was I had already done the job at my previous company. I was the more experienced one. In this case, I wasn't old enough. In this case, maybe I wasn't the right gender. In this case, I was passed over, not for my capabilities, but for something else. And if I had had a mentor that could walk me through that, maybe the outcome would have been different. I definitely would have told people I was pregnant a lot earlier. But this just illustrates how I learned every single lesson in my professional career. It was hit or miss. Either I had a big win and I was like, let's do that again. That approach really worked. Or I had some sort of disappointing loss like this one. And then I had to kind of figure out where I went wrong and what to do differently the next time. So in 2020, 2021, I read all of the policies and all the rules, and then I went to our corporate communications approval process for C-suite. We had like a whole process around if we wanted to communicate, like do anything publicly, if we wanted to speak on stages, be interviewed by a magazine, etc. Basically, the company had to approve whatever we did. And I went to them and I said, I would really like to start a podcast where I could talk to up-and-coming professionals and just give them the rules of the road that I didn't have. It's kind of like a virtual mentorship. And you know what I was told? I was told no. I was told no so emphatically that I could hear it in California from Munich, Germany. It was a no. Not allowed. Don't do it. Can't have it. Then, at the exact same time, they're like, but we can manage your LinkedIn for you. And you can get on all of these virtual stages and talk to all of these women that we will collect about how you have built this amazing career here. So at the exact same time, they put their hand on my head and pushed me down and said, you have a gag order, you can't speak in public. At the very next thing, they're like, but you can be our dog and pony show all day long. You can be our spokesperson, you can be our model, you can train people, you can do all this stuff. And so internally, all of a sudden, I was getting these curated, scripted opportunities to do what I wanted to do publicly, unfiltered. So when I left the corporate world in the fall of 2022 and I went to a startup, one of the conditions of me moving into that role was being able to start this podcast right here. And very specifically, I had a conversation where I said, listen, I want to take the gloves off. I want to be unfiltered. I want to spill all the tea. I really want to shift the paradigm in corporate America. And the only way that I can do that is by paying it forward and teaching the lessons that I know. And the Opt-in podcast was born so that you could determine what you wanted to opt into and opt out of. It's really a tongue-in-cheek play around email subscriptions, right? Do you want to opt in? or do you not? And this was not the lean in philosophy. I have thoughts about that as for another podcast on another day. But this was really the land where you would be informed so that you could make choices. That's really it. And so the first solid year and a half of the podcast, no, probably the first solid year of the podcast, if you go all the way back to the beginning, bless you, you do not need to, you will hear me spilling all the tea about how to be successful in corporate America, how to navigate the political landscape, how to become influential, how to get that promotion, when it's time to leave. I literally broke it all down. I told all the things that the C-suite doesn't want you to know. I shared all of the tips and tricks of the trade. I let it all hang out. And I did that on purpose. This was a public service podcast for all of the aspiring professionals out there. And then, as happens, the story we call life kicked me in the teeth, right? So that was December of 2022. I started the podcast. July of 2023, very tail end. That is when I knew something was up with the startup. I knew there were some things going on that had me thinking that maybe this wasn't a long-term play. And also my personal life became very public. And what I had hidden in for years and had not talked about and had glossed over and explained away had become public fodder. Overnight, I still had this podcast to produce and communicate where I was literally spilling all the tea and I was giving all of this advice and I felt like an absolute fraud. Because I had this incredibly successful career. I had this incredibly challenging personal life and I'd gone to a startup and lo and behold, by October of 2023, that startup was no longer. And I remember week after week recording this podcast and thinking how disingenuous I was for providing tactical advice and examples and illustrations for how to build this amazing career when in fact I was lost and I didn't know what my next right step was. I had rung the bell and I didn't want to ring it again. I really didn't want to go back into the corporate world with my tail between my legs and function inside of that system anymore. And I really wanted to leverage this platform, this podcast, to be able to give real people real information that could make their lives better professionally and personally. And so I wasn't in a place where I could provide advice about leaving corporate because I was lost and I was unemployed and I had no prospects and I had begrudgingly started a business so that I could just get a little bit of an income as an independent consultant, and I really did not know where I was going. And yet I continued to show up on this podcast week after week and at least share what I had learned previously. I basically started speaking from the perspective of the old Melissa did these things. The old Melissa learned these lessons. The old Melissa XYZ, right? And so that probably went on for 6 months, maybe longer. By the time we got to early 2024, I started to pivot the content. Initially, it wasn't intentional. It was really me just experimenting with this concept of fractional COO and operations support, what we could bring to the table, and if I could talk to small business owners. And before I knew it, this podcast turned into what it is today, which is still opt-in. You still get to decide, am I going to listen to this advice? Am I going to take these tactics? Am I going to do this thing? Am I going to work for somebody else? Am I going to work on my own? Am I going to sell my business? Like, you still get to decide. The spirit of opt-in is that you have the choice, always. And what we focus on now are business principles. What we focus on now are frameworks and philosophies and tactics and lessons learned and stories, all about how to navigate the business world as a whole. We primarily focus on small business. What I will say to you, though, is all of our episodes, all of them, can be applicable to you based on where you are professionally. If you need to know how to interview somebody, go listen to that episode. If you want to talk about annual budgeting, we did one of those back in November. Go listen to that. If you wanted to learn more about annual planning, or you want to learn how to navigate difficult conversations, there's so many various topics out there that you can pour into and you can listen to. And that's the whole point of This is just a platform and a place where you get free information from experts, and then you can do with it what you want. So by early 2024, this had really pivoted into more of a business focused podcast and less of a professional development podcast, which is really what that was. And I didn't do this big fanfare. I didn't have a marching band and say, hey, we've completely changed what we're doing. I didn't change the name. I didn't change the branding. In fact, one of my kids the other day was like, your cover art for your podcast is the contact card in my iPhone. And I'm like, could we not? Because it's gross. I don't like it anymore. We've got to change it up. It's not who we are. But we've really evolved from that baby place that we were in December of 22 to where we are now in December of 2025, 3 years later. And one of the things that I am really proud of is that I committed to myself when I started this podcast that I was going to do one episode a week. I wasn't going to skip one. I wasn't going to take time off. I had heard all of these statistics around how many people start podcasts and then fall off the bend, and that you become in the top 1% of all podcasters if you just keep going. And I just wanted to do that. I basically said, as long as I have stories to tell and advice to give, I'm going to show up here and we're going to continue to do this the way that we want and that feels authentic. And here's what's really interesting about the podcast is I have always thought that I was a pretty good communicator. I'm one of those people that, give her a stage and a microphone. We say it all the time, those that know me, and she can go on forever. I have a friend who often, when we are in a business setting, will whip out our phone and she will start recording the things that I say because she knows nuggets are going to fall from the sky. Just give me a few minutes to get warmed up. And that's so humbling and supportive and lovely and all of the things. Every time she does it, I feel so grateful that somebody wants to listen to me and finds what I say valuable. But what this podcast did is it gave me the ability to build a muscle I didn't know that I needed to. It gave me the ability to communicate in long form. It gave me the ability to take the skills that I learned becoming an English major in college, crafting story and narrative, and convert that into a written medium. And what I didn't know then that I know now is that the way that I am growing my business is through conversation. It's through dialogue. It's through putting together cohesive thoughts and being able to communicate why it's so important that action is taken. It's getting an opportunity to be on broadcast news or go film at radio stations or to be spotlighted in press around the globe. And all of that has been made possible by all of you sitting here, spending 3 years with me, allowing me to flex my communication muscle. You see, I started this to teach all of you, and what I didn't realize is that I was going to learn in the process. I had this wish that I was able to give my knowledge away for free to the people that needed it when they needed it. What I didn't realize in return, it was going to teach me a whole lot as well. And so now that we are at the 3-year mark, and now that I've achieved something that I didn't even know I had as a goal, I hope that the thing would last a year. I want to be honest with you that I don't look at numbers. I have no idea if 1 of you are listening to this or 75 million of you are listening to this, but it's really given me an opportunity to keep my learning mindset open, to find new ways of communicating old information to all of you, and to stay tapped into the things that are happening across the global landscape. So if I think just about this year alone, if we look back at what has gone on this podcast this year, we have covered so many topics that are important to me. And you have received so much advice and information that really this has become a living organism of research. And you can come back into the library of the podcast anytime you need something specific to get access to, and anybody around the world can get it. And that's really that was a spirit for which the podcast was born, and that's a spirit for how we will continue. Recently, I had somebody ask me if I was going to bring interviews back to the podcast, and I think about it from time to time because A, you get to hear a voice other than mine. B, I love to have conversations with people, so it's just kind of fun to do. And C, it's really good to get differing viewpoints out so that you can reflect on what you want to take and what you want to leave behind. With all of that said, right now I don't have the bandwidth to prepare for interviews. I know that sounds awful, but I record these sometimes in the margins. And so for the next upcoming year, I want to be much more intentional. I actually want to be able to build a schedule and a plan for the topics that we're going to cover and how that's going to go. Business in some cases is seasonal and cyclical, and so I want to be able to share that information with all of you. You know, one of the things that we'll talk about in the year in review episode, which I'll be recording in a couple of weeks, is that my business has materially changed over the last 12 months. And I want to talk to you a little bit in a condensed version about where we started and where we've ended and what we've learned along the way. Part of the reason that I want to share that journey based on what we've done in the last year is because many of you that have a business or are considering starting a business learn from the stories of others. I often listen to podcasts that Alex Hormozi puts out, not because I learn anything new, net new, from what he's saying. There isn't a new way to do business. There isn't a new way to market. Like these things are the things that they are. What's new, though, is how various industries and individuals have taken the same old frameworks and then leveraged them to get amazing results. And so I want to talk about the story of On Call COO and what's happening with that business, because I do fundamentally believe that if you hear the stories of others, it may inspire an aha moment for you, like you didn't see it until you saw it in somebody else. It may give you an idea on how to get over an obstacle, or it may just be the nudge that you need to get the thing started that you've been delaying over and over. This podcast is for everyone and anyone. One of our core values, mine personally, is to foster inclusion, and that means everybody belongs here. I have a very specific perspective. I am a woman who relatively grew up in the middle class, Northern California, in the suburbs, and was not affluent, but had a good life and continue to have a very good life. I understand my privilege. I understand the position that I'm in. And really all that I'm trying to do is get out to as many people as I can and give as much access as I can. So on the third birthday of this podcast, what I want to do is recommit to all of you that what you're going to get here is transparency. You're going to get honesty. You'll get the stories when I'm able to tell them, so they may not be real time. You are going to get to walk the walk as I continue to grow my business and learn lessons from the inside out that maybe you can all learn too. And I also reserve the right to reinvent this podcast as we go. I don't see that happening, but if you would ask me in 2022, this version of the podcast was never meant to be. It would have never been a thing. And so what I do know is that the only thing certain is uncertainty, and we will continue to evolve here in the coming years. I appreciate all of you so much. This was just going to be a short podcast to say thank you and happy holidays. I hope that you are enjoying all of your time that you are taking or not taking with your family and friends. And until I see you next year in 2026, please know that you are wise and you are strong and you are capable, and I believe in you.